Darkcast Network. Indie pods with a dark side.
Hey y'all, welcome back to Mountain Murders Midweek. I'm Heather.
And I'm Dylan.
Hey Dylan.
Hey girl.
How's it going?
I'm enjoying fall.
Yes, we are heading into spooky season and we have our Halloween horror movie countdown. It's almost like a Mountain Murders film festival
Yeah.
happening. We've been posting on our Instagram account at Appalachian True Crime all of the horror movies that we are watching leading up to Halloween.
Watched some real gems already.
We have. So if you want to follow along, watch some of the same films, or maybe you just want to check out what we've been watching over the past couple of days, feel free to go to Instagram at Appalachian True Crime. Dylan, we saw the new Exorcist movie last night.
We are on the edge of horror here at Mountain Murder Studio.
Yeah.
Oh my God, the new Exorcist, dude.
The Believer.
I gotta say, I was concerned going into this movie. Because you'll see a trailer and it looks really good. Seems like it happens with horror more often than any other movies. Looks really good. And then you see the movie and it's terrible. Absolutely terrible.
You saw all the good parts in the trailer.
Yeah. There's no surprises.
And then the rest is a flop. That has happened to me more than once, Dylan.
So we saw the Exorcist trailer. I didn't even know this movie was coming out. And I'm like, oh my God, that looks really good. Heather's like, bam, we're getting tickets. We're going tomorrow. And I got to say it delivered. I think it was excellent. I think it was
I enjoyed it.
It was in the spirit of the Exorcist world and previous movies. And I think they nailed it. And I really enjoyed it. And it was scary, creepy, kind of gross, just like an Exorcist movie should be.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there could have maybe been scarier parts. It was, for me, it was more of like a thriller, like psychological horror, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I would agree.
All right. Dylan, heading into spooky season, we are dedicating our midweek shows to some of the better creepy topics out there, right?
Boo, bish.
Blah, blah, boo. I thought today we could discuss some murder houses, some of the most famous murder houses in the U.S.
And to be clear, people, this is houses that are rove around and kill people.
It's true.
These are murder houses.
Yeah, these houses just take to the streets with knives and guns. You just never know.
And people's really surprised that a 3,200 square foot house can sneak up on a victim, but hey, what can I say?
Yeah, it's not far off from the Monster House movie. Right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. All right, Dylan. Let's get started. I thought we could discuss the home, the story behind the home, and then some of these actually have like maybe kind of a legend that's grown around the home. But then we'll talk about what actually happened.
Okay.
All right, so let's get started. Our first home I have selected is the LaLaurie Mansion.
Ah, yes, you start out strong.
Now, Dylan, do you know a lot about Delphine LaLaurie?
Now, sometimes I'm known to confuse her with other people. But if I'm to...
Not you.
No, not me. I know it's...
Dylan is never in a state of confusion.
This is news to everyone. I'm sure there's no one's ever noticed this before. But if I'm correct, the LaLaurie house would be Madame LaLaurie's home. Yeah. I'm on it now, yeah.
I think you may be on the right path.
But anyway, she is the one who had slaves and was very cruel to them.
Okay, so you know a little bit about Madame LaLaurie. Well, our story takes place in 1834. And the home is located in New Orleans, Louisiana. It's one of the most famous, iconic homes in New Orleans. And it's located at 1140 Royal Street. If you recall, during our trip to New Orleans, Dylan, we were able to see the LaLaurie house. Now, we didn't go in. There was a ghost tour out front.
There was.
And we were like, oh, cool. There's the LaLaurie house.
Now, I got to say,
that's the extent of our story.
New Orleans is a place I would like to be on Halloween.
Oh, yeah.
So I think we need to arrange that one day.
On April 10th of 1834, smoke poured from the LaLaurie Mansion, a huge home in the French Quarter of New Orleans, owned by socialite Delphine LaLaurie and her wealthy husband, Dr. Louis LaLaurie. The fire had started in the kitchen and spread quickly throughout the house. As flames engulfed the two-story structure, the LaLauries ran into the street and implored neighbors to help them retrieve their furniture and antiques from what was becoming quite an inferno. As volunteers rushed forward, someone in the crowd stepped up and asked, "Aren't there still people in the house as well?"
Yeah, don't worry about that. Get that Louis V chair out of the front foyer.
There were. It would be a few decades before slavery was abolished and the LaLaurie's owned slaves. They called them servants, but the community knew all too well about them because Delphine LaLaurie, Dylan, had quite a reputation in town. Delphine had been brought to court charged with abusing her slaves. So now it was only natural to wonder where they were as the house burned. They were not outside. Neighbors wondered why the LaLauries weren't in a rush to rescue them along with their other belongings. It seemed very odd. If nothing else, the slaves could be helping to empty the burning house.
Well, you could at least let them out to get your stuff out. I mean, can we just take a step back and just try to put ourselves in the mindset of living next door to someone like this? All of a sudden, your neighbor's house is on fire. They're running around screaming alarm because back then there is no bunch of fire trucks to show up. If you're lucky, there's a bucket line, but if there's no water source, that's not even happening.
Well, they did have like those little fire brigades.
Well, yeah, but I mean, oftentimes, I mean, the equipment and everything is so low tech.
It's very antiquated equipment. They don't have hoses.
Right.
You're right. It's literal buckets.
And fire is hard to stop.
The likelihood is your house is going to burn.
Right.
And everything will be destroyed.
Yeah, and they're out there imploring you to help them get their antiques and such out. While all the time, you realize or think that there's people in there. Why aren't we getting them out first? I would find that very odd.
Well, the LaLauries seemed to be hiding something, and when neighbors asked about the servants, Louis responded to the neighbor by saying, quote, "Never mind the servants, save my valuables." For reasons no one can fully explain, that comment would later be attributed to his wife, Delphine. And slaves were valuable, so why was there no effort to save them?
And they're also people.
Well, absolutely. That's the top priority here, Dylan. People in the crowd became enraged when they realized there were servants in the house and that the LaLauries were letting them burn to death. Many had heard the rumors about Delphine's earlier court case, and they had traveled throughout the neighborhood. People knew that the LaLauries kept their slaves chained in cramped quarters within the house. Some men ran into the home specifically to find the slaves that the LaLauries had condemned to death. Kicking down locked doors, they barged into the slave quarters. There they found slaves chained to the floor with iron shackles around their necks and ankles. The local New Orleans Bee newspaper reported, quote, 7 slaves, more or less, horribly mutilated, were seen suspended by the neck, with their limbs apparently stretched and torn from one extremity to another. Language is powerless and inadequate to give a proper conception of horror, which a scene like this must have inspired, the paper wrote.
Yeah, so they break in there. Well, it's good to see the neighbors care maybe a little more than the LaLauries do about people being killed or dying. But you bust in to free the slaves, and it's like a house of horrors.
It's truly stomach churning to read about this. So the paper reported that slaves were not just being mistreated, but they were clearly being tortured. Some were in such bad condition that rescuers feared they might die from the injuries they suffered before they had even been rescued from the fire. The townspeople were convinced that Delphine was the guilty party and that her husband, the doctor, had little responsibility for the crimes. But again, we don't really understand why that became the consensus at the time.
Right, just like statements by her husband or were later assigned to her. It's like it always comes back to her in the people's minds.
People love to hate a woman, Dawn.
Well,
it's so much easier to assign blame to evil women.
Well, it's true. I mean, an evil woman's an evil woman.
Well, we know. We've discussed this in the past. I get so much more hate as a host of this show than you ever do, though you end up saying the most offensive things. But people like you and think you're funny, and it'll always be that female host, right?
That's true.
Because misogyny is real.
Misogyny is real. And
there are people out there who are very intimidated by a strong woman.
Wait, never mind. I shouldn't say misogyny is real, but you can't put a but after that one.
No.
Because, misogyny is real.
And you've seen it firsthand.
I have seen it firsthand.
So again, it's a lot easier probably for folks to point a finger at Delphine. Again, she's a woman. It's 1834. Women are still somewhat considered second-class citizens in this country. I say somewhat. They are, right? Her husband's a doctor. He's well-to-do.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, or she could be the person doing all the bad stuff. I mean, that's the other option.
But it sounds like her husband's a dick, too.
No, he is. He is a dick. He's a dick.
Okay, so the rescuers helped remove the slaves from the home, and they took them for medical treatment and then to the police station. Authorities were trying to determine what steps they should take next. The cause of the fire was never determined, but people thought it might be started by one of the abused slaves in order to spite this cruel master, Delphine LaLaurie. Medical personnel were shocked by what they saw when treating the LaLaurie slaves. Some of the slaves bore festering wounds, infested with maggots. Others had obvious signs of intentional injuries inflicted upon them, such as drill holes in their skull.
Oh my God.
At least one reportedly could not walk because of severely injured legs. And years ago, I remember reading a story that the legs were broken almost crab-like.
Well, I mean, there is a technique called hobbling where, you kind of...
Oh, we've seen Misery. We know.
Where you mess them up to where they can't really run away or anything like that. Well, this sounds so terrible. These torturous things that have been done to these poor people.
But wait, there's more.
Oh my gosh.
The scandal ballooned as word spread through New Orleans of the bizarre and cruel injuries that the slaves had suffered before the fire. Much of, at the LaLaurie mansion. The New Orleans Bee reported that thousands of people came by the police station to view the slaves, having heard of the atrocities and wanted to see if the story was true. The paper then reported that many of the angry citizens made their way to the LaLaurie mansion, where they demolished and destroyed everything upon which they could lay their hands. The mob remained still unabated and threatens that they're going to they're going to just demolish and total tear down of this whole property. We're just going to get rid of it altogether. But the police were called to restore order. The house was not destroyed by the mob, but the paper reported that much of what the LaLauries had saved from the fire was destroyed.
Okay.
The mob was not content to just smash the LaLauries' furniture. People called for Delphine to come out and answer for her crimes. Realizing there was no way she could remain in her home and fearing the crowd outside might turn into a lynch mob, she hitched up a carriage and she and her husband rode away from the city, escaping some who tried to pursue them. They were rumored to have fled to the docks, where they paid a handsome amount in gold to a ship's captain to take them immediately to New York City or Paris. From there, the LaLauries faded from history. Stories persisted that they lived in exile in Paris and that possibly in her old age, Delphine had returned to the city in secret, where she finally died with no one taking notice. The house remained as a gruesome reminder that even in the homes of the rich, unspeakable things might be happening behind closed doors. Now, despite the home's reputation as being a house of horrors,
right,
as you called it, Dylan, or maybe this is where Rob Zombie was inspired by his House of a Thousand Corpses movie, right?
I'm sure, Rob Zombie is obviously a horror fan, so I'm sure that this could be part of it, right?
So despite the home's reputation, it was eventually sold to others and repaired. The tales of torture and murder would follow the home from owner to owner through the decades. Here we are today in 2023, still talking about the LaLaurie House. So this is a legend that has persisted through the decades and grows with each passing year. From time to time, the story would appear in local papers discussing the history of the home and its former owners. Some people dubbed Delphine LaLaurie as Lady Nero.
Oh, wow.
So the mansion became renowned as a house of horrors. The legend of the house grew over time, and so often happens, the story has been embellished and exaggerated, becoming more horrific with each telling. Dozens of people were said to have been killed in the house, making Delphine one of the most reviled characters in Louisiana history. She was said to have hidden corpses in a well on the property and to have buried her murder victims in the courtyard. The LaLaurie mansion still stands in the French Quarter. But let's talk about how much of Delphine LaLaurie's story is true, Dylan.
Yeah, well, I need to know.
So Delphine's marriage to Dr. Louis LaLaurie, that's a mouthful.
Double L.
Was her third, but the French doctor, who was 20 years younger than her, provided a lifestyle unlike any she had been able to afford previously. The house they purchased on Royal Street in 1831 was considered palatial, although it was only 2 stories tall then. And Delphine would soon become known for throwing these extravagant parties to which she invited New Orleans high society. At the time, New Orleans was the 5th largest city in the United States, with a population of more than 46,000. To maintain the residence and throw these huge parties, Delphine kept servants. Let's be honest, they were slaves in the house.
Oh no, they're employees
Yeah,
with no benefits.
I'm just gonna say I'm sure they have health care and dental.
Yeah, well, I mean, the chains are for their safety. Okay, I mean,
This is just the thought of owning a person and forcing. I mean, it's so unimaginable to me, the concept of slavery.
It truly
how
is.
could you treat another human being in this way?
And that's any time during history, any time I've come across it, it doesn't add up. I can't wrap my head around. And I know there's historical viewpoints and all that mess, but no, I think it's one of the most abhorrent things man has ever done to each other.
It's true, and it's been happening since the beginning of time. During this time, neighbors whispered that Delphine treated her slaves badly. Although slavery was legal at the time, slave owners were still expected to treat their slaves with some modicum of humanity. Delphine apparently didn't think such notions applied to her. Within just a few years of moving into the home, Delphine was brought to court accused of physically abusing one of her slaves. The charges were not criminal in nature. Abuse of a slave was considered only a civil matter at the time. That is, one could be fined for the infraction but not put into jail. As a result, Delphine's criminal record remained untarnished. Now, I don't know if Delphine was found liable and had to pay a fine or if the charges were dismissed because, again, this is a civil matter.
Right.
So we all know it was very likely this wealthy woman would only get a little slap on the wrist.
Right.
Get a little no-no.
Talking about, you should be better to them servants of yours, Delphine.
Either way, that was the last anyone had heard of her poorly treated slaves until the day of the fire. And the story of the slaves being saved from the burning house is also a true part of the story. It is that point where the story shifts from history to myth. Now, when the LaLauries left New Orleans, the legend of what happened in their house began to grow. Nowadays, we are able to find these very exaggerated stories of the LaLaurie mansion all over the internet. You have folks making TikTok videos about it, blogs, podcasts reporting the, quote unquote facts of this case, which are not actually facts because up until recently, I didn't know the true story of the LaLaurie House.
Oh my gosh, dude, tell me.
So instead of the slaves being tortured, most stories claim the slaves were murdered in the home. But according to some accounts, as many as 50 or 60 slaves had been murdered at the LaLaurie mansion. Most stories include, among the victims, a young slave girl who fell or was pushed from the roof by Delphine. Others tell dozens of slaves killed and buried on the property. Notwithstanding the stories, there is no evidence that a slave girl ever died from a fall on the premises. Furthermore, there were no murdered slaves or buried victims found on the premises. The story of the fire in 1834 was well publicized, but none of the contemporaneous reports mention anyone dying or being murdered in the house before the fire. When the slaves were found at the house during the fire, none of them were dead. It is true that 7 who were rescued were in rough shape, and some of them may have died later from their pre-fire injuries, but no one can find any documentation of any charges ever levied against the LaLauries resulting from the discovery of the slaves burning in the house. It appears that most of the stories about the LaLauries sprang from the initial reports of cruelty to the slaves at the house, and the one time Delphine had been brought into court for mistreating a slave. So without question, the LaLauries tortured their slaves and treated them worse than animals. They certainly valued their furniture more than they did human lives. But no one was murdered inside the house. Be that as it may, countless people flock to the mansion today to see the home where Mrs. LaLaurie tortured and killed her slaves, even though that's not exactly totally true.
Okay, so as far as the dozens of bodies and the story of
Yes.
the girl and all this, that seems to be exaggeration.
Yes.
Well, more than exaggeration, fabrication for the most part. But it does seem that she was not a nice person.
No, it sounds like
were-
she was a heartless bitch.
Her and her husband, let's be honest, has to be in on it to a degree, right? He's financing everything.
Oui.
O-double-L. What's his name? Louis what is-
Louis LaLaurie.
LaLaurie.
I always think of Louis L'Amour.
Louis L'Amour.
Louis LaLaurie. So we know, Dylan, it takes little evidence to start a legend. Disproving one is a different story altogether. More than 100 years later, researchers would reconstruct the events at the LaLaurie mansion and Delphine's movements after the fire. Much of the legend of the LaLauries had simply been embellished to add drama to the tale and make it likely a good ghost story. It is true that Delphine fled New Orleans. First, she went to Mobile, Alabama. From there, she went to New York City and then traveled to Paris, where she lived openly for several years. There is no indication that anyone pursued her to Europe or that authorities were chasing her after the events in New Orleans. But what's really surprising, Dylan, is that she would later return to New Orleans. The mansion where she lived with her husband had long since been repaired and had changed hands. Delphine settled in a different neighborhood in New Orleans, and her husband was no longer with her. It appeared that the LaLauries had gotten a divorce and that the doctor had moved to Cuba to start a new life.
Ah, yes.
Delphine's name appeared in a city directory in 1850, and there was also a legal action filed in her name that year. However, she was not in the directory in 1852, and her estate was settled in 1856. So that indicated that she had probably died sometime in the early 1850s. So maybe like around 1851.
Okay, so she wasn't running from a full-on, basically a lynch mob out of the area.
Right.
But it sounds like, unless they just had these other plans or wanted to go live somewhere else anyway, and the fire just kind of pushed them to it, sounds like there were at the very least rumblings around town or maybe some heavy gossip about what has happened or what people think has happened in her home, and they just cleared out. They got out enough pressure for them to feel it and should just leave the area and go live somewhere else. So, you know what I'm saying? If all this isn't as true as far as her being pursued and threatened, but they did leave the area for years, it sounds like.
Yes.
So I mean that it seems to be some truth to the community at the very least thought these bad things that happened, maybe a little worse, but it's terrible anyway. You got people chained in your basement. I don't care if you're taking pillows down there to them. That's a horrible thing.
No, it's not okay.
It's not okay in any form or fashion.
No.
Even if you're quote unquote nice to your slaves, which is a little better than being cruel to your slaves, but they're still your slaves, so it's not okay. But
they're being forced
what?
against their will to work for you. I don't care how fucking nice you are. That's not okay.
I gave him two shirts. I gave him two shirts to wear down there in the dungeon. I know it gets cool at night.
Jeez, Dylan.
What the fuck, dude? I just can't believe people that, you have money like that. Just pay some regular, real servants to come and go.
That's how rich people keep their money, Dylan, because they cheap as hell.
Cheap bastards.
They are cheap bastards.
Some rich people's got to be all right, surely.
Well, I don't know any.
We don't know any rich people, really, dude.
I know some rich people.
You know some rich people?
Yeah. You tell me I'm rich when I buy rich people bread.
You do live the life of rich people with the bread and the cheeses. Because Heather don't even get the cheese over there where the regular people buy cheese. Now she gets the international cheeses over there that are by the deli.
Look, I'm just a big fucking mouse, okay, bitch? I like cheese.
No, I want cheese.
Bitch, I like cheese. What? I'm going to write a song. It's a rap song. It's called Bitch, I Like Cheese. Okay, so if Madame LaLaurie had been suspected of murder. She could have been charged when she returned to New Orleans, but she was never charged, and there's no indication that she ever took any steps to hide from public view once she returned to New Orleans.
Okay.
So even though maybe she had earned a bit of a reputation in previous years, it wasn't enough for her to live as a hermit when she came back. Now, the LaLaurie Mansion, built in 1832, stands at 1140 Royal Street. 3 stories tall now. There's a wrought iron balcony on the second floor and distinctive arch windows on all the floors. The 3rd story was added to the home in 1850, sometime probably around when Delphine died. It is a 10,000 plus square foot home, and it's considered to be French Empire style. It has 6 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, and with many murder houses, it is said to be haunted. The tall structure wraps around a courtyard that is now paved with bricks. Many believers in the murder-slaves theory would suggest that there are bodies of murder victims buried beneath the courtyard.
It's just a modest accommodations. The 10,000 plus square foot home.
So the home was used for a variety of purposes over the years after the LaLauries vacated it. In fact, the uses to which it was put were quite wide-ranging, Dylan. For example, it was a public school for a period of time.
Okay.
I'd love to go to elementary school in the murder house.
It was a Jiffy Lube early in the 1900s.
You're so ridiculous.
What?
It's a Raising Cane's.
It's a Raising Cane's.
I just wanted to get some chicken down there in the French Quarter.
Now I want Raising Cane's.
Yeah, I know, right? I wish we had one around here.
I do too.
A music conservatory. At one time, it was a bar and then a furniture store. By 1937, the home was more commonly known as the Warrington House, named for a more recent owner. Even so, postcards depicting the house suggested it was haunted and mentioned the cruel Delphine. The Historic American Building Survey contains a photograph of the home taken in 1937, captured 1140 Royal Street, haunted house, but in parentheses it says the Warrington House. Now, in April 2007, the home made headlines once again when actor Nicolas Cage had reportedly purchased the home for $3.45 million.
Oh, my God.
Just one of many historic homes around the country that Cage had purchased, including another one in New Orleans. Only 2 years after buying it, Nick Cage placed the LaLaurie Mansion back on the market with an asking price of $3.9 million. Although the price was later reduced to $3.55 million, a buyer failed to materialize, and in 2009, a bank foreclosed on the property. It was listed for sale in 2010 with an asking price of $2.9 million, but again, there were no buyers. You have to think about 2008, 9, 10. This is when we were in a major recession in this country.
Yes.
Due to the housing market.
Nicolas Cage made many smart real estate purchases around the world, and it almost ruined him.
He bankrupted himself.
It almost ruined him. I mean, his cat's buying like Scottish castles, the LaLaurie. I mean, he's just buying like not just
but all sorts of other weird things. Like
weird.
Did he buy like a dinosaur skull or
yeah.
something?
Oh, he was just I saw was it an interview or something was talking about he damn near ruined himself, and that's where you get these spate of he's just doing any kind of movie, I guess, over the last few years, few years, because he's trying to, he basically bankrupted himself, like you said. And, but I felt like this would be me if I had Nicolas Cage money.
You would just be blowing it?
Well, I would go around buying like haunted mansions and shit.
I would too.
You know what I'm saying?
I would want to buy up on the murder houses.
He'd be like, he bought that Bigfoot that I got down there in Georgia. He paid him
We can have the
$200,000.
Mountain Murders Murder Mansion collection.
Yeah.
We could do like a tour. And charge people to do like a national tour of our murder homes.
Okay, so which ones would, off the top of your dome, which ones would be in your sights to put in this collection?
Oh, well.
Amityville.
Well, we could buy the LaLaurie home.
I'd want Amityville.
I want the Mercer House in Savannah.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah. And for some reason, I want the set house, the Psycho set house that's on the movie lot, just because it's fucking dope, dude.
That'd be great.
It's dope. I want to live in the hotel, and then I
want the Stanley Hotel.
Stare at people when I, check them in, ask them if they want some ice.
So the home sits prominently on the corner of Royal Street and Governor Nichols Street. Just 2 blocks from Governor Nichols Street is another mansion from the 1830s that was owned by some famous folks. You may have heard of Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt. They bought a home just down the street at 521 Governor Nichols Street for $3.5 million.
Yeah, I don't know who that is.
Today, many visitors to New Orleans make a special trip to see the home where Delphine was said to have tortured and killed her slaves in the most barbaric fashion. But the true facts of the case matter little to many of the visitors because the story is way more interesting the way it is commonly told. The LaLaurie mansion is easy to find, and the exterior is visible from the street, but it is a privately owned home, so if you choose to visit, make sure you're not a nuisance. People do live there.
Me and you've discussed that before. If you buy one of these notorious homes, these legendary homes, and are like totally pissed if anyone comes anywhere near it, even stops on the street and looks at you, then I think you're kind of being a bit of a butt munch. I mean, you knew this come with this story and this legend and this history. But that being said, the public goes way too far many times in thinking just because this home has a story.
No, you're absolutely right, Dylan, because a lot of the movie set homes, I know the people who bought the Goonies house were complaining that people were stopping by taking pictures.
You bought the Goonie house.
But I think people were being obnoxious, like knocking on the doors,
that's not okay.
Trying to come in and tour the home. And people were like, bro, we live here. You're not going to come in our house. What's wrong with you?
That's way too much.
Dylan, we have one more murder house to discuss today.
I'm scared. Can't we talk about some more murder houses later on some other time?
No, well, I thought maybe this could be
for the rest of the month.
Something else we do this month.
Oh my god.
But I have some other spooky things I want to talk about this month as well. Murder houses is just one component of the Mountain Murders Murder Tour, Dylan.
Damn, Heather, you scary.
Yeah, I know. So it's funny because there was a period of time that we were considering a move to New Orleans when we first discussed the paper mill was closing and we wanted to get out of Dodge. We had seriously considered moving to New Orleans. And when I was reading about the Governor Nichols Street, there were several rentals on that street in that area.
Wow.
That I had kind of marked like these are potential places we could live, Dylan.
Oh man, that'd be so
Wouldn't
cool.
that be groovy? And we're like, hey, we're a block from the LaLaurie mansion.
I'm gonna go to the LaLaurie mansion and hang out if you like.
Well, I mean, we haven't totally taken that off the table.
No, it was no. If it works out for us, we'll have a mobile home. And we'll be living all over the place. And I would totally kick it in New Orleans for a period.
Yeah, we should totally make our announcement, Dylan.
Go ahead.
We haven't really told our listeners what our plan is.
This is good. This is really going to happen, folks.
And no, it really is. I know we're going to do this, and then we don't.
We're impulsive.
But this is something that we did do. We have decided we are going to pack up our life and
our studio
and go on the road. We've bought an ambulance.
It's an ambulance.
An ambulance. And her name is Lucy.
It is.
We have Lucy the ambulance. We're going to live in this ambulance and do like van life.
Van life.
So if you're a listener and you want us to come camp in your driveway,
we will.
Hit us up. We will.
Only if it's free.
We have a time frame where we plan to fully get on the road within the next few months. We will be recording Mountain Murders from the road. We have some special plans for the podcast.
God, man, I can't wait. Look,
we're going to take a Mountain Murders murder tour is what we are going to call it. It is the true crime tour. And we are going to be reporting to you live from the road.
Oh, my God.
So not only will you get to see van life adventures, ambulance life adventures, Dylan, but you will get the true crime you have come to expect from Mountain Murders.
The mobile Mountain Murders studio true crime tour of America. I mean, we're going to be popping in on patrons. We're going to be popping in on listeners. We're thinking about trying to do meetups all over the country. We are finally going to cut the strings of life and the rat race that hold us back and down. And we are
that have been preventing us from taking Mountain Murders to its full potential.
Yeah, right? It's going to be like bam in your face.
Exactly.
Damn, son.
Yeah, so we're very excited about that. Dylan, I have one more murder house story this episode.
Which one's next? Which one?
2319 East 100th Street in Chicago, Illinois.
Oh wait, is this hotel of the murder hotel?
This is an American Horror Story.
No, but
the answer is no.
Okay, but
this
that was
is not
based...
the H.H. Holmes murder motel. That doesn't even exist.
That's real.
Well, I know, but I'm saying it doesn't even exist today.
Oh,
It's been leveled.
God,
years ago.
Isn't that whatever's true of that story is crazy. But...
We will be discussing serial killer Richard Speck.
Oh my God.
And the Speck House. What has become known as the Speck House. Are you ready, Dylan? This is a brutal story and very, very fucked up. One of America's most infamous murderers from the later half of the 20th century was Richard Franklin Speck. He was an unemployed 24-year-old drifter who spent some time working on ships in the Great Lakes area. Around 11 p.m. on July 13th of 1966, Speck walked up to the back door of a townhouse located at 2319 East 100th Street on the south side of Chicago. The townhouse was on the other end of an apartment complex with 6 units side by side. It was only a few hundred feet from the Merchant Marine Union Hall, and he probably noticed it from his time spent on the streets there recently. This particular townhouse was home to 8 young women, nursing students from South Chicago Community Hospital. They also had another female friend staying with them that evening. Speck had a knife and a gun he had stolen from a woman he raped earlier that evening. This guy is on a crime spree.
For some reason, Speck just gives me the heebie-jeebies every time I even think about his case.
He's very creepy. And
Yes.
even stories about his life in prison.
Everything.
I don't have anything positive to say about this man.
No, I know he's one of those guys that gives any woman within 1,000 feet the creeps and the heebie-jeebies.
I would, yeah.
And he just looks that way,
yeah.
too. He's just greasy.
And he's just a big piece of shit.
He's gross, and he's just...
I can't believe you said he didn't smell, because you're always like, he looks like he smells.
And he's probably sticky.
Unquestionably, Speck was a very bad man. He had Born to Raise Hell tattooed on his arm and Love and Hate tattooed across his knuckles.
That's good knuckle tats. I mean, I will say that. I'm not saying anything positive about Speck, but those are good knuckle
Love
tats.
and Hate.
Yeah.
I always think of Eddie from the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Yeah, or I would do fuck you with the exclamation point after you on the other one. That's a good one, right?
Yeah, except that you might, need to get a job later on. If that's not gonna work out for
I'm
you.
going all in on the mountain, unless Mountain Murders will allow it in their code of tattoo code and the ethics.
I'm sorry, it's
folder.
not in our employee handbook. It says you are not allowed to get "fuck you" tattooed on your face or your knuckles.
Really?
Read the handbook, Dylan.
Oh my God.
I will have to terminate you, and I'm also acting as the HR representative for Mountain Murder. So
Wait a second.
you're in trouble.
How many hats do you wear in this corporation?
I wear all of them except for the one that you're wearing right now. And that's only because it's too big to fit on my head. Your head's huge. Speck forced his way into the townhouse and herded up the women into a bedroom at gunpoint. This story, every time I've listened to a podcast about Richard Speck, I've heard the story. It is so terrible.
Torturous.
He terrorized these young women. I just can't even imagine the kind of fear that they were feeling at this time.
I think that's what gets me with the Speck story is the terror. And yeah, continue.
So he rounds the women up, takes them into a bedroom at gunpoint, ties them up. Somewhere along the way, he missed one young woman. A nurse named Corazon Amarero crawled under the bottom mattress of a bunk bed and hid there when she first heard the commotion in the back of the apartment. From her viewpoint under the bed, she watched, again, cannot imagine, as Speck took the women out of the room one by one. A while later, he would return and get another woman. She would later learn that Speck was raping the women and strangling and stabbing them to death. The victims who were strangled had distinctive knots tied in the material they were strangled with, which would make a lot of sense to investigators later when they discovered their suspect was a sailor. So he's using nautical types of knots. He raped one of them in the same room where Amarero was hiding under the bed. after he killed the 8 women over a period of 4.5 hours.
God, my God.
I'm telling you, this like makes my skin crawl, this story. Speck left the apartment. The entire time, Amarero hid under the bed, waiting for the ordeal to end. Around sunrise, Amarero emerged from under the bed and saw her friends, her dead roommates.
God, my God.
This poor woman climbed out a window, started yelling for help. She's screaming, "They're all dead. All my friends are dead." Neighbors called the police. A local radio reporter at the time named Joe Cummings was out driving nearby when he heard the police radio, the call, and raced to the location. Encountering just one police officer at the apartment, Cummings entered the townhouse and wandered around the crime scene, seeing the bodies of the victims and noting the large amounts of blood on the floor, which he walked through.
What the hell, dude? This guy should know better than that.
They're not securing the scene at all.
No.
This is a catastrophe. He then called in to WCFL with his mobile radio equipment and did some live broadcasts from the home, announcing to Chicago that 8 nursing students had been murdered at this house. More police arrived. Cummings continued reporting, helping keep Chicago on high alert as the people realized there was a maniac on the loose.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. A monster walks amongst you.
Police were able to find fingerprints of the killer at the scene. Detectives had also gotten a good description from the surviving victim. The killer was tall. He had blonde hair, spoke with a heavy Southern accent. It's going to stick out in Chicago, right? Police fanned out and began questioning everybody they could find nearby. People in the neighborhood remembered seeing the man that had been described by Amarero in the area.
Yeah, Speck is someone that would stand out. I mean, he's just a hard, mean-looking guy. You know what I mean? I think he's someone you would notice.
Might a sailor have spotted the boarding house filled with nurses when he came and went from that union hall? Sure enough, somebody at the union hall remembered a sailor matching the exact description. The man had been upset about not getting a job and had made a scene at this union hall. The event had stuck in the clerk's mind, and he could even remember the angry man's name. His name was Richard Speck, and Speck had previously given his fingerprints to try to get the job. So it was just a matter of time before police would be able to catch him.
Well, that's good. I'm glad they were on his trail very quickly.
Let's talk a little bit about Richard Speck, Dylan, before we wrap up today's episode. Richard Speck was born in 1941 and had a pretty ugly upbringing. In a large family, he had an alcoholic and violent stepfather. He had a short-lived marriage that ended when his wife divorced him, saying that he regularly sexually assaulted her. He spent time in prison in Texas, and on another occasion, Dylan was charged with stabbing someone and only paid a $10 fine.
Oh, that's going to be $10. $10 fine for
stabbing someone. That almost sounds like where our justice system is today. In 1966, I'll get that out, Speck headed north to see if a change of scenery might help. He had a sister named Martha who lived in Chicago, and he thought he would stay with her and her husband, a man named Gene Thornton. And this went on for a period until he wore out his welcome. Because as you can imagine, someone like Richard Speck, probably not the best house guest.
Probably not. And he's like, when I'm being up here with you guys, keeps me from stabbing people.
Well, he was just the kind of guy who was always in or around trouble, creating problems.
He's an asshole.
And so it didn't take long for his brother-in-law to figure out his number. Like, he's just a piece of shit who goes around getting in trouble, getting into fights, causing issues, committing crimes, and we don't want to have this guy in our house.
And every time they try to have a discussion with him about his behavior and stuff, he'd be like, "Didn't you read the tattoo? When it says I'm born to raise hell. And hell.
Hashtag mama tried.
And hell is what I'm going to raise.
It's the only hell my mama ever raised.
Raise hell, praise hell."
It's true. Speck's brother-in-law had been in the Navy and thought that Richard Speck should get a job as an apprentice seaman on board a ship, because if nothing else, it would get Speck out of their lives for periods of time.
Heather was an apprentice seaman.
I was actually never a seaman apprentice.
She knew some seamans in the Navy. I know that.
I was a seaman, Dylan.
I bet you were.
And I know a shanty or two if you're feeling froggy.
Oh, yeah.
Let me seduce you with my extensive knowledge of sea shanties. Who knows? Maybe Speck could find someplace far away that he liked better than Chicago. At least that was the hope of his brother-in-law. Like maybe he would end up in like Thailand or somewhere like that.
Ever thought of visiting Afghanistan?
Yeah. Have you ever considered a life abroad and out of my fucking house, basically? So the two went down to the Coast Guard office, and Speck applied for a letter of authority, which would allow him to get an entry-level job on a Great Lakes ship.
Like a merchant's
marine,
or what is that? Merchant's marine? I mean, what is that?
Yeah, merchant marines.
Yeah, and it's like a maritime thing, right?
A maritime?
Yeah.
A maritime?
Maritime.
Maritime.
Is it maritime?
It's maritime.
Well, maritime, it's a water thing. It's boats and such, right?
Boats and hoes, baby.
Boats and hoes.
The process required Speck to provide fingerprints and have his picture taken. He landed a job on an iron ore freighter working the Great Lakes. His first trip didn't go very well. He developed appendicitis and had to be airlifted from the boat to Hannock in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. He joined the ship but got in a drunken argument on board and was kicked off. So he wound up back at his sister's place pretty quickly, I'm sure much to his brother-in-law's dismay. But he wasn't giving up his dream of getting Richard Speck out of the house. He took Speck to the National Maritime Union hiring hall so he could file the necessary paperwork to get his seaman's card. Speck then tried to get on board another ship, but ran into a stretch of bad luck. Or maybe it's just because he's a shipbird.
He has antisocial behaviors. He's not going to get along with anybody.
Several of the jobs were filled shortly before he had heard of them, and at least once he got sent on a wild goose chase after a job that had already been filled. After one of these fruitless searches at getting a job, he caused a ruckus, yelling at one of the agents at the union hall, and they would remember this incident. So again, it pays to not be a dick.
Yeah, especially if you're, well, I'm glad he was a dick so that, quickly kind of put two and two together. And his last name, Speck, would stick out in my head because that's kind of an odd, different last name,
Speck,
right?
the peckerhead?
Yeah, I'd be like, old Dick Speck over there, he was an asshole. And he's mad because he didn't get a job.
So this whole time, Speck has been living with his sister and the brother-in-law, and they were really getting sick of him. They finally told him, like, you just have to get out. We don't want you here anymore. You're a terrible roommate. We don't want you in our home. GTFO.
Closing time, bud. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here.
Exactly. Speck spent a night or two on the street, sleeping in houses that were under construction. He would drink at the local dive bars, pass out in alleyways. The last time his sister saw him before the trouble was in the parking lot of the Union Hall, which was, again, just down the street from this house. On July 13th, Speck spent the day drinking at a bar and spotted a woman there named Ella Hooper, who was also drinking. He lured her back to a cheap motel room where he robbed and raped her. One of the things he stole from her was a small pistol that she had been carrying in her purse. He then went back out, had some dinner, and returned to the bar where he had first encountered his victim, Miss Hooper.
Now, did he kill her?
No, he just
raped her. And robbed her.
Well, I mean, not that he just did,
I'm not saying that.
He just assaulted her and robbed her, but he did not kill her.
Okay.
But still, then he's going to have the audacity to go back to the bar?
Yeah, I know.
What a piece of shit this guy is.
What a piece of shit.
Gosh. He drank some more. It was at that point that he went to this apartment filled with nursing students, armed with that gun he had stolen from Hooper. After his killing spree, Speck didn't even go that far away. Even though he knew he was a wanted man, he didn't leave Chicago, and he actually spent the next couple of days hanging out at cheap motels and drinking in the local bars. Police found the address of Speck's sister and brother-in-law on that paperwork that he left at the Union Hall and had asked the union to call. So they set up kind of like a sting operation. Like, hey, will you call and tell this guy you've found a job for him? The brother-in-law managed to find Speck quickly and told him he had gotten a call about a job. When Speck called, they told him that the job was available on a ship that Speck had already sailed a few days earlier. It was one of the ships he had been angry about that he wasn't hired. Suspecting a trap, Speck told them he was out of town and that he would see what he could do about getting back to Chicago.
Oh, really?
Still, he didn't act like a fugitive. I mean, because now he's kind of, okay, I think they are on to me. They know who I am.
I'm going to go back to the same bar
But
and
he's
get
still
drink
just
more.
hanging out. He ended up getting a prostitute and bringing the sex worker back to his room and even told her his name was Richard. When she left the room, she told the front desk and mentioned the fact that Richard Speck had a gun. So the police show up and question him. They asked for identification, but the name did not mean anything to them yet.
Oh, my gosh.
So he tells them, I'm Richard Speck, and they don't do anything about it.
Is this because they haven't they haven't put two and two together as far as...
Well, what happened? Well, what happened was...
Or it just hasn't spread properly through the force?
Well, it's a communication issue because investigators at the scene of the crime had quickly learned Speck's identity, but they had not released this information to all of the patrolmen yet. They were still keeping this kind of close to the sleeve, if you will, Dylan.
Damn it.
The police took his gun. They left. Realizing how lucky he might have been, Speck changed hotels. He moved into a different one. And this is one that charged only 85 cents a night.
Oh, man. I bet that was a...
You can imagine that it's a real classy, elegant place.
I bet it's fluffy pillows and clean linens. That's what I would expect in this establishment.
This sounds like a place, Dylan, where your favorite word, sticky, might come into place.
Why is it? I'm going to call the front desk and ask them, why my room's sticky?
So word from the patrol officers started to spread around, and that's when investigators finally got word about their suspect. News reports soon included Speck's name and a good description of his Born to Raise Hell tattoo, Dylan. Chicago became a city on edge, as you can imagine. Speck realized now his time was limited. He had bought newspapers that displayed his picture on the front page, his name, saying he was wanted for murder. He went back to the 85 cents a night motel and attempted to commit suicide by slashing his wrist with a broken wine bottle. The desk clerk at the hotel was alerted by a fellow tenant who saw Speck bleeding and called for an ambulance. At Cook County Hospital, one of the doctors attending Speck noticed that Born to Raise Hell tattoo and remembered reading about it in the newspaper. So the police show up shortly. They talk to the victim, the surviving victim, and ask her to put on her nurse's uniform and go on rounds with another nurse from the hospital to see if Richard Speck was the right man.
Oh, my God. This poor woman.
I know.
The trauma.
But she agrees to do this.
No, yeah.
And so she is face to face with Richard Speck, and she is able to confirm that this is the killer.
My gosh. I never knew that part of the story.
I didn't know that either. Chicago police were overly cautious. They did not want to make any mistakes in arresting this guy.
They want to make sure they do everything. You know, they've already kind of fumbled with the crime scene, not securing it quickly and early on. Because even the one patrolman should have known. No one's going in here till my other boys and girls get here to investigate this.
No one is going in until we all go in.
No one goes in till we all go in. And let alone with your recording equipment, some damn, journalists, it sounds almost like a night crawler. You know, those people that monitor
I've seen the movie.
Police bands and such.
You mean like TMZ paparazzi reporters?
Yeah, well, what they call them, freelance?
I think so.
Night crawlers. That's just, I'm going with that. Jake Gyllenhaal was one of them.
Well, Speck claimed not to remember anything about the night of the murders. He said he had been drinking and was high on drugs the entire night, and his memory was blank. How convenient. No one bought it. The state had Speck examined by a team of psychiatrists and doctors to make sure that he was competent to stand trial, and they confirmed he was mentally sound. Speck had little chance of acquittal. Along with his fingerprints at the scene and his checkered past, there had been the surviving witness. It took the jury only 49 minutes to find him guilty, and the court sentenced him to death. After a series of appeals, Speck's death sentence was overturned by the Supreme Court, which found that the court had improperly let the prosecution exclude people from the jury pool who had been opposed to the death penalty. So shortly after that, The U.S. Supreme Court declared the death penalty unconstitutional anyway. Speck was then resentenced. His death term would be from 400 to 1,200 years in prison. I'm sorry, his term. I didn't mean his death term. His term would be moved from the death sentence to that he would serve 1,200 years in prison. So,
well, is that, excuse me, Your Honor,
we know he will die in prison, which he did. Not long after that, he died of a heart attack before his 50th birthday in 1991.
Is that to run consecutively, Your Honor?
1,200 years.
Mm-hmm.
God. So that was the Supreme Court that abolished the death penalty at that time. Now, what didn't California do it before the Supreme Court?
You're again asking me things that I do not know. I'm full of very random facts, Dylan, but I don't know everything.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, because
sounds like you have some homework.
When California did do it or whatever, there were so many big time criminals slated to be killed that got a reprieve because of the abolishment of the death penalty.
Now, Dylan, before Richard Speck died, he made even more headlines from behind bars. In 1978, he granted an interview to a Chicago newspaper columnist named Bob Greene. He no longer claimed to have had amnesia at the time of the killings. Speck openly admitted that he had killed the 8 women and remembered it quite vividly. He told Greene he had passed his time in prison getting high on drugs and believed that he would be out of prison before the year 2000. Readers were outraged, as you can imagine, and wondered how prisoners like Speck were able to get drugs behind bars. But that would not be the last time that Richard Speck made headlines, Dylan.
Oh my God. People surprised there's drugs in prison? Come on now.
I've actually seen the video that we'll be talking about. It's out there if you want to watch it. In 1988, someone, just some anonymous person, Dylan, shot a video of Richard Speck in prison and passed it along to a Chicago television reporter, Bill Curtis. You may know Bill Curtis.
I remember this. I've seen this video.
This was in 1996 that this video was finally released to news. So someone sat on this video for like 8 years.
That's crazy.
On camera, Speck casually spoke of how he had killed the women. It just wasn't their night, he claimed. Very insensitive. But it was really his behavior on camera that shocked viewers. Speck was walking around in silk panties and apparently had grown breasts. People speculated that he had somehow gotten his hands on hormones while behind bars. He ingested cocaine and performed oral sex on another inmate while the camera is rolling.
What the fuck?
The entire time, it was clear that Speck knew he was being taped and didn't care. He appeared to believe he could do anything he wanted and get away with it. On camera, he said, quote, "If they only knew how much fun I was having, they'd turn me loose." The video, as you can imagine, caused quite a stir. I mean, even more so than Bob Greene's column.
Well, you think so?
People demanded to know who was giving Richard Speck cocaine behind bars.
And where he get them titties
How
from?
is he getting hormone treatments? Where did them titties come from? Was anyone supervising these prisoners? Who allowed a video camera inside the prison?
We got a lot of questions.
It was like the inmates were running the show.
Yeah.
Yeah. The apartment where Speck killed the nurses was eventually turned into a condominium along with the rest of the units in the complex. The townhouse unit where Speck killed his victims is on the far left of a 6-unit block of 2-story townhouses viewed from the street. Back in 2005, one of the units sold for $89,000, and then it was sold again in 2005 for $96,000.
Damn, nice little profit.
The murder unit is about 1,400 square feet. It has 1.5 baths. It was built in 1958, and now it's privately owned and is considered fairly nondescript, blending in with the other units in the little area. So if people did not know that this had been the Richard Speck murder house in 1966, you'd probably walk right by it, never think twice.
It doesn't stand out.
It does not stand out in any way.
It's not a creepy looking old house or anything like that.
No.
Okay. God, Speck. I mean, tell me he didn't deserve just hot lead between the eyes. Or matter of fact, that was too good for him.
Yeah, he deserved much worse.
He deserved death of 1,000 cuts.
This is a guy who should be hung up in a public square.
No, he should be put on some type of medieval torture device of some sort. Finished off in a, what is it, the Iron Maiden or sarcophagus, and left, slowly choked to death.
The Man in the Iron Mask.
The Man in the Iron Mask. Any of that shit. The rack. I'd like to see Speck on the rack. Yeah, I would like to see him drawn and quartered by 4 horses.
Plus, I want to know more about them titties.
I don't want to know more about them titties in particular, because they're, all I'm gonna say, they're on Richard Speck.
Where'd they come from?
I don't know. That is curious to a degree, but at the same time, I don't even want to know. I mean, I don't even want to know where Speck got them tits from.
See, I have a depraved mind.
You have to
I
know.
need to know.
She needs
I
to
need
know.
to know where they came from.
She needs to know. Maybe you ordered it on Amazon. They get there in like a day or so.
That's
Your
true.
package gets
Yeah,
there.
you're right.
So he gets like, I'm ordering them titties.
Okay. Well,
All right.
thanks for that, Dylan.
Well, thank you for. God, I bet he's sticky. I bet he was sticky in that video.
That
So
video
gross.
is so. It's
disgusting.
He's like gross. He's
And
so gross.
he's so
And then you
gross.
know what he did, and you're just like, this guy's a piece of shit
He's
human
a
being.
big old POS.
He's a damn monster.
He is a shitbird. All right, thank you for that, Heather. Wow, I kind of want to continue that.
Spooky season is upon us.
You gonna get scared?
This is Halloween.
This is Halloween. This is Halloween. Oh man, we got to watch Nightmare Before Christmas all the way through. We done watched it like a couple of times.
It's true.
And The Lost Boys. Hey, if you're not watching The Lost Boys in the spooky season, you got to put that in your rotation. It's a classic. It still holds
I have
up.
questions.
About The Lost Boys?
There are some plot holes
Oh, don't you dare.
that aren't working for me in the story.
There is
No,
not.
I look. I
Don't-
love The Lost Boys, and I'm a huge fan, and we watch it like every year.
Take that.
Right?
Yes.
Love it. We saw Tim Capello in concert with his sexy saxophone.
He still believes.
He still got it.
He's still got it, bud.
Okay, guy was, I don't even know how old, in a Speedo
And
he
rocking
was
a tank.
doing the damn thing.
I mean,
And I was into it
Yeah.
until I had too many Jello shots.
Oh, my
But
God.
we won't get into that part of the story, but I'm just saying, we love The Lost Boys. However, as an adult, when I watch it, there are some plot holes in the storyline that I just would like to know the answers.
Give
Like,
me one example before we wrap up.
well, I want to know what these boys' relationship is with the video store owner, right? Because he's like the head vampire, but we don't really get
Yeah,
much on
backstory
that.
for David
I
and
need
his.
to
Yeah.
know what the relationship is.
How did he come to turn them? Why?
Yes.
Did he? Are they his minions? Are they his proteges?
Yes.
I mean,
I need to know more about, did the grandpa score with the Widow Johnson?
the Widow Johnson. I wonder if the Windex worked.
I know, right? That's what I'm asking. Did he score with the Widow Johnson? Did she like the stuffed, was it a Pomeranian?
Yeah, no, yeah.
I don't know.
It was a pug,
Did
I
she
think, a
like
furry
the
pug.
Did she like the stuffed pug
Okay.
that he had taxidermied for her?
Had he been battling vampires this whole time?
Yes.
Grandpa. I need to know that.
I want to know more about this little kid Laddie that's just running around in some weird, like, looking like he's a missing member of the Beatles in his
Where-
little Sergeant Pepper's jacket.
Where did they get his fucking clothes for this little dude?
He's just running around. Kid doesn't have like a line the whole movie.
No, he's like Star at the end when he's like,
Yeah.
yeah.
So it's like, who is this kid?
And why is he even here?
Yeah, what's the point of this kid?
Well, he's missing. He's on the back of the milk cart.
Yeah, but like, why'd they pick a kid?
Well, why not? Because he had a dope ass jacket
Look,
when
I'm
he
not
showed
trying.
up.
Look, if I'm a vampire and I'm trying to live forever, I'm not trying to live with a little kid. That's all
That
I'm
is
saying.
a valid point right
That's
there.
what I'm saying.
Valid point. Valid point. Because a perpetual kid for the eternity.
Another question I have: Corey Haim, where is he getting these amazing shirts?
Oh my God.
Also, he is seen a few times wearing an oversized blazer, but they're in California in the summer. So I'm like, why is Corey Haim wearing this oversized blazer? He has to be hot
Or a full on
in a
damn
beach community,
overcoat down to his ankles, bro. I don't care if
like
it
a
is.
trench.
I don't care if it is made out of cotton or linen. It's still hot, bud.
Yeah.
Okay. What
And
else?
the hippie parents in the comic book store, they're always like passed out in the corner.
The Frog Brothers' parents.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious, were they smoking the ganja or are they on some other drug? Because them parents is always checked out looking like it's the summer of love.
No, I think it's way more than marijuana. I think they're some peyote or acid or just they're full.
They're on their own journey.
They're fucked. You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
All right. So there are some questions. If people have any answers to some of Heather's queries about the Lost Boys, alleged plot holes.
There's one more thing in the movie that I was troubled by, and that is why Corey Haim's character Sam has a poster on his closet
Rob
door
Lowe.
of a sexy Rob Lowe wearing like a midriff top, so you can see Rob Lowe's like six pack.
It is the sexiest, sassiest Rob Lowe poster I've ever seen in my life.
I felt like I might have gotten pregnant from this Rob Lowe poster.
And I cannot believe
he's quite pretty.
I've never seen that poster.
I've never
before.
seen the poster either, but I've never actively searched for a Rob Lowe poster. Okay. Just curious why he's got this sexy poster of Rob Lowe.
Just look it up right now, listeners. The Rob Lowe poster from Lost Boys. I'm sure it'll pop right up. And I got to know, Sam has got to be into it, right? Because it's right there, bud.
Well, I'm just curious. Like, why did we not take this a step further?
Yeah, I know.
Right?
Why wasn't Rob Lowe in the movie?
Or exactly.
We needed a young Rob Lowe in that movie.
I was fine with a young Jason Patrick. Okay? That's all I'm going to say.
All right.
All right, Dylan.
Wow,
well,
shit.
It's been fun sitting down with you. It has not been fun discussing Richard Speck.
God, what a dick.
Because he is a speck.
He's a speck of shit.
Exactly.
I hate him. Now he's born to feed worms. Fuck him.
Born to feed worms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Instead of being born to raise hell.
No, you done raised enough. Fuck you, dude.
All right, Dylan. We'll be back Sunday with a new true crime case.
We will be. And if anyone wants to go check out the new Exorcism, I think it's highly worth it.
You mean The Exorcist?
Exorcism. I'm calling it Exorcism. The new Exorcist, The Believers, is I thought was pretty damn good.
It's a pretty solid movie.
I think it's a good one to see in the theaters.
Definitely not the worst in the franchise.
All right. And you can join us on our movie journey and see what we're watching. You can watch with us.
Make a suggestion if you have a horror movie that's just so bad, we have to see it. We love the cheesy bad movies.
Oh, my
Let
God.
us know. You can always email us at mountainmurderspodcast@gmail.com. Dylan, have a great day.
You too as well.
Bye.
Bye.